Hey, this is the World Advice Channel 2. What I want to talk about today is a topic of why do great civilizations keep on collapsing? So, when it comes to civilizations that have existed throughout history, whether it could be the Babylonians, the Persian Empire, the ancient Greeks, the Romans, and so on and so forth. Why do they keep on collapsing? All of these civilizations keep on collapsing, okay? And not just why do they keep on collapsing, it also, of course, brings up an interesting question of what can we do to prevent ourselves from collapsing, okay? So that's the point of this video, okay? The main point, at least, is what we can do to avoid ending up like a lot of these civilizations that have existed in the past, okay? So now I mentioned that, let's get started. So the first reason why, or I should say the reason why, main, to be even more specific, why they collapse is corruption. That is the reason why all the great civilizations throughout history, everything from obviously the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persian Empire, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, all the way down to, the medieval Europeans, civilizations. And of course, after that, during the age of exploration, and anyone who knows history, at least the very basics of it, of course, you had the Spanish Empire, you had the French Empire, you had the British Empire, all that type of stuff, the whole 9 yards, yada, yada, yada. You get the point, okay? All those great civilizations that have existed throughout history, whether it could be in the area of Europe and the Middle East or throughout the whole world, have always collapsed simply due to the fact that their nations were corrupt, okay? As long as they weren't conquered, they collapsed due to corruption, okay? Because when you look at the history of the world, okay, you know, for all these civilizations, you realize at the same time, they always follow a similar trend, okay? They start off from nothing, then they reach a point where they be in the middle where they become pretty powerful, and then they reach a point where they become very powerful, and then they reach a point where once they become very powerful, they start falling off. And one thing you will always notice when civilizations fall off is that towards the beginning of their fall off, they tend to have a lot of corruption in their nation among the nobility, and as a result of having corruption, they have a lot of projects that are not completed. They have a lot of infighting and even wars as a result of the corruption because people are not getting paid the money that they should be paid, and so on and so forth. So it gets them angry because people have families to feed, and so on and so forth. So they start as a result, you know, obviously, having issues for that matter. And as a result, it eventually leads to civilizations decline, such as ancient Rome specifically. It fell mainly because of corruption, because I know everyone's going to make the argument, oh, well, there's many different reasons why the ancient Roman fell. And I'm not saying that there's not, but the biggest number one reason is corruption. They just didn't do a good job in dealing with it, okay? Because towards the end of Rome's existence, you tend to see a certain trend of them, having politicians who are very greedy, who a lot of times even plot to have the emperor killed if they don't like what they have to say, even if the emperor is good and is actually doing something for the people. They don't have a lot of money being put into resources, such as for the military, and not just for the military, but also, of course, for making sure that the infrastructure of the nation that they live in is still kept, in all honesty, to put it bluntly. That's exactly what I'm trying to say here. Okay? And that's exactly what I'm trying to get across, for that matter, to put it bluntly. Okay? Um, to be quite honest with you, okay? That is the truth of the matter. And as a result, we see the nation as a whole, such as ancient Rome being the best example, start declining, and there's a lot of people who start leaving the nation, and so on and so forth, and eventually falls into a decline. And when it's not done, it is obviously every civilization. Look it up yourself. If you look up history, towards the very end of the civilization, you will always see one common trend, okay? They become overly decadent, okay? And it's not really the issue is with decadence, because actually decadence has its benefits because it helps actually in itself, you know, um, of course, its benefits, such as it encourages people to, of course, produce things, and it helps actually encourage the expansion of an empire and so on and so forth. It has its benefits. Absolutely, undeniably, it has its benefits. It's just that the people who do that stuff, a lot of them don't really fucking do anything aside from just consuming resources, and of course, what they need for the resources is money, and they're not having that money being put in the right places. They just consume it. Okay, and that's the truth of the matter. And that's one trend. Every civilization that collapses, you will always see that same exact trend. Towards the end, is that the people in power become very corrupt. The nobility, of course, they become very corrupt, and as a result, they fall apart. So that's the truth of the matter. Why all great civilizations fall apart. At least the main number one reason why they fall apart is its greed, and that's the truth of the matter. Okay. Now, obviously, since I mentioned what makes all great civilizations come to an end, the question now becomes what can we do to stop that from happening in our modern world, okay? Specifically, of course, for nations like Canada, America specifically, and of course, Britain, and many other ones. How can we prevent that from happening in our modern world? How do we prevent a great nation like those nations from just falling apart on their own, okay? Well, that's a very good question to ask. A very, 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 very good question to ask, to put it bluntly. The best way to prevent corruption, even though, of course, anti-corruption measures would be very helpful, okay? The best way to prevent corruption, government corruption, is to realize that the best way to stop it is to teach people to have better willpower, okay? And even though, of course, I know it's going to be controversial, and of course, communists, which the internet's now full to the brim with them nowadays, are going to say, okay, that's idealistic. And to answer their question, okay, I am not saying there's not going to be people who are going to give them to temptation, okay? You have bad people everywhere. And I know you're smart. Most people should be smart enough to know I'm aware of that, And do not just hear what I'm saying and misinterpret me as saying something that I am not trying to say, okay? We all know that there's going to be people, even if you teach them to do things like this, they're still not going to do it, okay? But we also need to realize that the best way to deal with corruption, is to realize that the best way to deal with it is to realize that we have to teach people how to have good willpower, okay? Specifically, people in positions of power, whether they actually care about the people or they don't care about the people, having good willpower is the best way to prevent that from happening, as well as, of course, most importantly of all, anti-corruption measures. But aside from anti-corruption measures, we need to have people have good morals and ethics, or I should say, in this case, good self-control for that matter. Because the truth of the matter is, when you don't have people who have self control and you just say, okay, we're just going to rely on anti corruption measures to resolve the situation, that is a case of lacking principle. It's just like when you are a kid, okay, or I should just say in general, kids for that matter, okay? Because I know some people might get offended by me trying to put them into this. So, no, I'm not trying to say you. I'm just speaking about kids in general, okay? Are you just going to teach them, okay, like if they did something wrong? Okay, I'm just going to teach them, for example, okay? Okay, if you did something wrong, you're going to get punished for it in the end of the day. And that's the only thing that you're going to teach them if they do something wrong. Or are you going to teach them the principle of why it's not a good thing? Like, for example, why is it good not to be, why is it not good to not be greedy? Or why is it, if not that, okay, not good to of course be mean to others and stuff. You want to teach them the principle of it, because when you look at it logically, it's much more beneficial for society to not do those things, for that matter, okay? That's the truth of the matter, for people to be like that. That's the truth of the matter. Common Sense 101. And when you teach people, even people who might not do it because they actually give a shit about people, but you teach them, for example, okay, like, does it make sense to be greedy, for example, to be quite honest with you, because it's eventually going to bite you back on your ass, because most people who tend to be greedy eventually get caught, and of course through being corrupt, they get a lot worse of shit for it. Is it really worth doing that in the end of the day? Because no matter how you look at it, if you're in a position of power, as long as you are doing the right thing and you're patient, it's eventually going to pay off in the long run. Okay, so that's how we need to teach people to think. We need to teach people to have an ideology and a mindset behind it. Okay, we can't just teach people, okay, just get this measure to be done to punish people. We have to teach them a principle, because in the end of the day, that is the best way to deal with corruption. It's to teach people how to have good willpower as well as a good understanding of why it's not a good idea to be corrupt. So, in other words, to sum it up, an ideology of how to deal with people, to deal with preventing people from becoming corrupt. And that's the truth of the matter, okay? So we can prevent that, okay? And that's the truth of the matter. So anyway, this is my video. This is all I have to say. Um, I hope you enjoyed this video. And just remember, if you like this video and videos like this, remember to thumb this video up and hit the subscribe button. And this is all I have to say. And simply put, I'm out. So bye.